Welcome to SAXU Update. In the public eye, Kim Taehyung is often seen as someone far removed from the idea of rejection. His charm appears natural, his presence magnetic, and his appeal seemingly effortless. Yet a resurfacing story has recently drawn attention to a lesser-known chapter of his life, one that reveals a far more human side behind the global icon. According to discussions circulating among fans, Taehyung once found himself in a situation many would never associate with him today. He expressed interest in a woman and was turned down. There was no public confrontation, no dramatic fallout, and no official statement to ignite headlines. Instead, what remains is silence, and it is precisely that silence that has made the story linger. The alleged moment of rejection is believed to have occurred long before Taehyung reached worldwide fame. At the time, he was described as sincere, curious, and unshaped by the intense spotlight of the entertainment industry. His feelings were said to have been expressed simply, without grand gestures or expectations. The response he received, however, did not align with his hopes. Rather than becoming a public wound, the experience faded quietly into his personal journey. It was never used to build a narrative or generate sympathy. Many fans believe that moments like these, unspoken and unresolved, may have played a role in shaping his emotional depth, later reflected in his music, artistry, and stage presence. What makes the story particularly compelling is the contrast it creates with Taehyung's present image. As a global figure admired by millions, he is often perceived as someone who could never be rejected. This story challenges the perception, reminding the public that before the fame, the accolades, and the admiration, he was simply a young man navigating emotions and uncertainty like anyone else. In an industry carefully constructed around image, a quiet story of rejection feels unexpectedly honest, not because of its sensational value, but because of its relatability. It offers a reminder that vulnerability is not erased by success sometimes. It is shaped by it. To this day, Taehyung has not addressed the story directly, and perhaps he never will. For many fans, the significance lies not in the identity of the woman involved, but in the emotional experience itself, one that may have subtly contributed to the person the world sees today. Sometimes it is not the love stories that come true that leave the deepest mark, but the ones that never begin yet quietly shape a life. As the conversation continues to surface online, reactions remain divided. Some fans approach the story with curiosity, others with quiet reflection, while many emphasize the importance of boundaries and respect for Taehyung's private life. What stands out, however, is how the discussion has shifted away from gossip and toward interpretation, less about facts, more about meaning. Observers note that Taehyung has long expressed emotions through art rather than words. His performances often carry a sense of introspection, and his creative choices suggest an artist deeply attuned to feeling and nuance. To some, this lends weight to the idea that early, emotional experiences, whether joyful or disappointing, may have helped shape his sensitivity as a performer. At the same time, the absence of confirmation has led others to caution against drawing definitive conclusions. In an era where fragments of stories can grow larger than reality, silence can easily be filled with assumptions. Yet even this uncertainty plays a role in why the story resonates. It exists in the space between truth and perception, where audiences project their own understanding of vulnerability and growth. What cannot be denied is that the narrative has humanized an otherwise untouchable image. It reframes Taehyung not as a figure defined solely by success, but as someone who has experienced emotional setbacks without allowing them to define him. For many, this perspective feels grounding proof that personal evolution often begins long before public recognition. Ultimately, whether the story is remembered as fact or folklore, its impact lies in the reflection it invites. It reminds audiences that behind every carefully curated image is a life, shaped by moments unseen, decisions unannounced, and feelings quietly processed. And perhaps that is why the story endures. Not because it reveals something scandalous, but because it reveals something familiar that even those who seemed destined for admiration once stood at the crossroads of hope and uncertainty, learning silently how to move forward. As time passes, the story has begun to function less as a point of discussion and more as a mirror. Fans and observers alike find themselves reflecting not only on Taehyung's journey, but on their own experiences with rejection, restraint, and emotional growth. In this way, the narrative quietly transcends celebrity culture and enters a more universal space. Industry insiders often point out that longevity in the public eye is rarely built on perfection alone. It is shaped by resilience, self-awareness, and the ability to transform personal experiences into creative language. Taehyung's career, marked by steady evolution rather than abrupt reinvention, is frequently cited as an example of this principle. His artistry feels layered, as though informed by moments that were never meant to be explained, only felt. This may also explain why the story has not triggered outrage or controversy. Instead, it has encouraged a more mature conversation about emotional boundaries, about what belongs to the public and what remains sacredly personal. In a digital era driven by instant disclosure, Taehyung's silence reads less like avoidance and more like intention. For many fans, that restraint has become part of his appeal. It reinforces the idea that not every chapter of a person's life needs an audience to be meaningful. Some experiences do their work quietly, shaping character and perspective long before anyone else takes notice. In the end, the story settles not as a revelation but as a reminder that growth often begins in moments no one applauds, that rejection does not diminish worth, and that even under the brightest lights, the most formative lessons are sometimes learned away from the stage. It is this quiet truth, subtle, unresolved, and deeply human, that continues to hold attention long after the conversation itself fades. As the discussion gradually softens, what remains is not speculation, but a sense of understanding. The story no longer demands answers. Instead, it invites acceptance of uncertainty. In a culture accustomed to clarity and constant updates, this unresolved narrative feels almost radical in its calm. Cultural commentators suggest that this is precisely why the story resonates across different audiences. It does not rely on confirmation or denial, but on emotional recognition. The idea that even admired figures carry unseen chapters aligns with a broader shift in how audiences engage with public figures, less as distant ideals, more as complex individuals. Taehyung's continued focus on his work further reinforces this perception. His artistic output speaks with quiet confidence, suggesting an individual who has learned to sit with emotion rather than explain it away. There is a sense that whatever lessons were drawn from earlier experiences have already been absorbed, translated into growth rather than grievance. For younger fans especially, the story offers an unspoken lesson. Rejection is not a dead end, nor is it a verdict on one's value. It is, at times, simply a turning point, one that redirects rather than diminishes. Seen through this lens, the narrative becomes less about what was lost and more about what was gained. Ultimately, the story finds its place not in headlines but in memory. It lingers quietly, much like the moments that shape people the most, unannounced, undocumented, yet profoundly influential. And in that silence, it leaves behind something rare in the world of celebrity stories, a sense of shared humanity that needs no further explanation. As attention shifts forward, the story gradually blends into the larger narrative of Taehyung's evolving legacy. Rather than standing out as an isolated anecdote, it becomes one of many quiet threads that inform how he is perceived, not just as an artist, but as a person shaped by time, choice, and experience. Media analysts note that this kind of storytelling reflects a changing appetite among audiences. Sensation is no longer the sole driver of interest. Nuance and emotional authenticity now hold equal, if not greater, weight. In this context, the story's restraint feels intentional, almost aligned with Taehyung's broader approach to public life. There is also a growing recognition that some truths do not require validation to hold meaning. Whether the story is interpreted as literal history or symbolic reflection, Its value lies in the conversation it inspires about emotional resilience and personal growth. It becomes a reference point rather than a revelation. As Taehyung continues to move forward, creating, performing, and evolving, the story quietly recedes into the background. It does not demand closure, nor does it seek permanence. Instead, it remains, as a subtle reminder that behind every moment of confidence is a path once shaped by uncertainty. In the end, what endures is not the question of what happened, but the understanding of what it represents. A reminder that even under global admiration, the most defining experiences often occur in silence, shaping character long before the world is watching. Taken as a whole, the story ultimately serves a purpose far greater than revealing a single moment from the past. It offers perspective. It reframes fame not as a shield against vulnerability, but as a stage built upon experiences that are deeply human and often unseen. In Taehyung's case, the narrative underscores how quiet moments, whether marked by disappointment or reflection, can leave a lasting imprint without ever needing public acknowledgement. Rather than diminishing his image, the story adds depth to it. It reinforces the idea that strength is not defined by uninterrupted success, but by the ability to move forward without resentment, to grow without spectacle, and to carry lessons without explanation. This understanding resonates strongly in an era where authenticity is increasingly valued over perfection. As the conversation naturally draws to a close, the story settles into its rightful place, not as controversy, not as confession, but as context. It becomes part of a broader understanding of Taehyung's journey, one shaped by restraint, emotional intelligence, and a quiet confidence that continues to define his presence today. And so the narrative ends not with certainty, but with clarity that behind the global icon stands a person who, like anyone else, has known uncertainty and emerged not louder, but wiser.